We all seen convicted criminals being released in many cases after only 40% of their sentences. We saw people going prison for saying things on social media. Are we living in a state of two-tier policing and two-tier justice? This and more from Reform leader Nigel Farage in this video.
Okay, good morning everybody. It's first day of term after the recess and we're going to start with a story that we think really matters enormously. As everyone knows, there is a growing perception in the country that we're living in a state of two-tier policing and two-tier justice. And when you see convicted criminals being released in many cases after only 40% of their sentences and already quite staggering reoffending rates, whilst people get very, very stiff prison sentences for saying beastly things on social media, millions of people are scratching their heads. But there is a story that has been somewhat buried, forgotten about, that I think turns the perception of two-tier policing and two-tier justice into a reality. And it is what happened at Manchester Airport. And I want, please, just to show you the footage of what actually occurred as a reminder. Because what happened here was a really violent exchange. It finished up, of course, with a female police officer having her nose broken. Pretty awful stuff. And yet, the only footage you saw was what happened subsequently when the police officers did manage to get control of the situation. There was huge criticism that a police officer had used his feet. But these are armed police officers, and the rules of engagement are very, very simple. If you're carrying a gun, you do not engage an assailant or somebody potentially dangerous with the other hand for fear of losing control of the gun. All of that was lost. But what's happened in the intervening period? Well, nothing is the answer, and we think we know the answer. We think we know the reasons why this happened, and I'm going to hand over to Richard Tice, who's going to go through this in more detail, give you some evidence that as yet has not been uncovered, and tell you the action that we intend quite shortly to take. Richard.
Thank you, Nigel. Good morning, everybody. So you saw the footage there of that shocking assault on police officers way back on the 23rd of July, some 11 weeks ago. Now today, we are sending to the Home Secretary a letter signed by all 5 of the Reform UK MPs setting out our real concerns, because this was a brutal, vicious, violent assault on those police officers who must have wondered what on earth was happening. It was so violent that a number of the officers were floored, at least one officer had a nose broken, and frankly, as Nigel just touched on, the officers showed great restraint by only using their tasers as opposed to something more serious. In many airports around the world, it would have been a case of weapons first, ask questions later. Those officers should be applauded for how they conducted themselves. 11 weeks later, the assailants have still not been charged. Just think about that. I mean, we've got the video evidence. What more evidence can there be? And yet we've seen actually a clear example where just 2 weeks after this incident, when regrettably other police officers were assaulted, they were arrested, charged, convicted and jailed in very, very short order, a matter of days. And that's what actually I think the public want. Prompt, fair justice. So you have to ask yourself, why, Home Secretary, is this situation different? Why are these assailants being treated differently to other assailants, other assaults on police officers? It's the same offence. there is no difference. Now, what actually happened, of course, was that when the footage came out, it actually came out through social media a day later, and it showed the back end of the incident. It didn't show the whole footage. So what was allowed to permeate through the country was that this was police brutality, that this was racism, that this was appalling, and a terrible sense of misinformation. We've heard a lot about misinformation. Misinformation was allowed to permeate through society and through the country. It wasn't until the Saturday, 4 days later, that the whole of that footage emerged through a leak. Not through official sources, but through a leak. And then everybody suddenly realised, as I realised when I saw the first footage, because I looked at the fact that 2 tasers had been deployed, that actually this was a vicious, violent assault. Just put yourselves in the mind of, if you'd seen the whole of that footage day one, within a couple of hours of the incident, you would have said, vicious assault, the police officers did well conducting themselves and apprehending the assailants. Now, this is what we've learnt from our sources. It turns out that someone very senior in the Greater Manchester Police, possibly higher, but we think right at the top of Greater Manchester Police, made a deliberate decision to withhold the full footage shortly after the incident. I repeat, my question is, why was that footage withheld? If it had been released, we would not be where we are. That is absolutely extraordinary. So you've got a situation where the IOPC, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, launched their investigation into the conduct of the officers before the Crown Prosecution Service launched their investigation into the assailants. Here we are 11 weeks later, and this investigation by the IOPC is ongoing, still going on. In fact, extraordinarily, they're now investigating who leaked the footage. That if the officials had released that footage immediately, we wouldn't be where we are. I understand over 500 people had access to that footage, and whoever did leak that footage, frankly, has done a great service to the national public interest. But no, the IPC, they think they should investigate it. So what's really going on here? That's the question we have to ask. We have a genuine concern that actually the CPS are withholding charging these assailants until the IOPC have concluded their investigation. And if the IOPC find any fault in the conduct of the officers, then that will give the CPS reason not to charge the assailants. Just think about that. Just think about the effect that might have on the morale of serving police officers up and down the country, thinking, hang on, I carry out my duty, but I may be left in it, I may be dumped on by the IOPC, and I won't be backed up. That leads to a complete collapse of morale amongst serving police officers. And if they're worried about that, then the impact is they won't actually carry out their duties and their functions in the way that we, tens of millions of British people, would like them to do so, because they're too afraid of the consequences. That is a very bad place for law and order and justice to be in our country. This is not acceptable. It's not acceptable to us at Reform UK, but much more importantly, it's not acceptable to tens of millions of decent, law-abiding British citizens. So we are therefore serving notice today in this letter to the Home Secretary that if the Crown Prosecution Service are not going to charge these assailants, then we at Reform UK, we will launch a private criminal prosecution against these assailants. We've taken legal advice. I have a top quality legal team on standby, and that is what we will do. And we will crowdfund it, and I'm very confident that we will raise considerable sums in order to carry out such a prosecution, and in order to provide the confidence that our serving police officers up and down the country want in their duty. It is completely unacceptable for the CPS not to charge these people. Now, it's been suggested to me that if we carry out this action and we launch a private criminal prosecution, that the CPS may then adopt it and carry it on themselves and then discontinue it. And so I just serve notice here today. Again, that would be completely, utterly unacceptable to tens of millions of British people. This situation is untenable. It's 11 weeks on. We're left with a situation where we genuinely ask the question, has a degree of misconduct or misfeasance gone on by senior officials at the IOPC, at the Greater Manchester Police, and by the CPS? This is not a good place for law and order to be in the United Kingdom. It is a very bad thing if tens of millions of British people think that we have two-tier policing and two-tier justice. That is the contents of this letter to the Home Secretary. We look forward to her reply and her statement on this issue, but the British people want action, we want answers, we want equal, fair, prompt justice. That's what we wanted to say, and we're very happy to take questions from members of the press.
What we'll do a photograph of the letter first. If you come up all round, you guys. Richard, you and I hold that. Get the position. James, you better sort of come on in a bit.
Squeezing, guys. Look to this camera first, please.
Certainly.
Thank you. No, this way.
We'll work round from left to right. How about that?
Yeah,
okay.
There we go. Slowly but surely.
1, 2, 3, down for 4, up for 5, 6, 7, up there, 8, guy with the blue top, 9 behind, 10 with the hat, 11. I think we've done that.
All good?
Very good.
Right on.
One more for you.
A little bit of video. That's
all right, okay. Great stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, okay. Richard, you stay with me. Okay, we're very happy to take questions on this, or frankly, any other subject you choose. Just tell us which organisation you are from, sir.
Tom Simons, BBC. The police have a policy for releasing video which says that there has to be policing purpose for releasing something like this because, of course, it can affect prosecutions. They didn't release the first video. You've sort of accused them of withholding the second video. What actually are you saying they've done wrong here?
Yeah, but the whole point about policing is they have to consider also about maintaining confidence and what's in the public interest. And that decision not to release the video led to serious allegations against the officers, serious allegations of police brutality against the Greater Manchester Police, and it led to protests, and it led to a crisis of confidence. So actually, it's about considering it in the round, what is in the public interest. And what's clear from the information we now have is that the decision was made not to release that footage. That is a terrible communications failure that led the situation to where it is today.
Yeah, I mean, the public deserves to be told the truth. Do you want to come back?
They almost never release footage in these situations. You're suggesting there's a cover-up. I wonder if you have any other evidence of that which you can share with us today.
I haven't used the word cover-up. What I've used is a serious misjudgment which had catastrophic consequences. And in a sense, we never stop learning in life, do we? And this has shown that actually communications is absolutely vital to prevent misinformation. We've heard a lot about misinformation over the summer. These events around this incident have occurred because of misinformation circulating that would have been prevented. So the leadership of the Greater Manchester Police have serious lessons and questions to answer.
Yeah, and this extends to other things too. I mean, Lord Carlisle, the Liberal Democrat peer the other day, said, why are we not levelling? That was the phrase that he used. Why are we not levelling with the public? And he meant that in particular in the aftermath of the riots, that perhaps if people had known the truth earlier, things wouldn't have been as bad as they were. Charlie, you. Microphone.
Charlie Peters, GB News. In your letter, you say that a very senior officer has prevented this being released in opposition to the advice of more junior officers. You've denied this is a cover-up, but have you heard frustration from sources in Greater Manchester Police about that decision? Do those officers feel as though this is a political witch hunt, to use your language?
Well, actually, the frustration is amongst tens of thousands of police officers up and down the country, because they can see a terrible mishandling of this situation, which properly handled, awful though the assault was, people would have understood. There was a brutal assault, the police officers apprehended them, hell of a scrap, but they got on top of the situation. And that's the frustration that, I've had lots of police officers write to me, email me, thanking me and Reform UK for the stance we took in supporting the officers and the broader police community on the front line in this situation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jack Elson from The Sun. Can I just be crystal clear? The allegations you make against Greater Manchester Police not releasing this video, are you saying that this is cock-up, or are you saying this is conspiracy? And in the letter you also say for some reason Manchester Airport assailants are being given special different treatment. What do you believe those some reasons are? Why do you think they're being treated differently?
Well, just on the second point, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, frankly, but it's clearly different. You cannot have anything more different, a greater example, frankly, that any of us could ever imagine in our lives, frankly, than this situation happening so quickly between the 23rd of July and just a couple of weeks later. Look, I'm not saying it's a cover-up. I haven't said that. What I've said is that it was a catastrophic decision, and someone made that decision. And frankly, in all the public sector, we've got to be prepared to hold our hands up, to learn when things go wrong, and to admit it and do better. And that's the point. You can't just keep sort of pretending nothing's gone wrong, because in that situation, the consequences of this have been terrible. And 11 weeks later, you've got the video evidence within a matter of days. How can we get to 11 weeks later? And it's this lack of confidence in the performance of different elements of the public sector. This is one very, very important one.
Very good. We have Aaron, one there.
Thank you. Martin Beckford, Daily Mail. You'll know that IOPC investigations sometimes take years. How long will you give the authorities until you launch this private prosecution? Thank you.
A great question. Definitely not years. Seriously, how long do you need? The footage is 29 seconds. The answer is not long. Not long, but we're not going to specify exactly. We want a response from the Home Secretary on this situation. And frankly, I think the CPS and the IOPC and the Greater Manchester Police, they need to update us. What's the situation? Silence isn't good enough. Because what happens in silence is it's a vacuum. And in a vacuum, misinformation spreads. Bad things happen. We don't want a vacuum. We don't want silence. We want answers.
Absolutely. Okay, we've got a couple here. Microphone.
Hi, thank you. Steph Sparrow from The Express. I'm going to pivot slightly and ask about winter fuel payments, if that's okay. MPs are back in Parliament. There's a big rally outside today. Winter is looming and pensioners are running out of time. What's your message to Labour, and what more do you hope they do in the next few days before the budget?
Well, they made a terrible mistake, haven't they? I mean, they've alienated. There are 10 million people going to lose the winter fuel allowance. Yes, it's true, some of them are well-off pensioners, but they are actually, as a percentage, relatively small. Quite why we can't link the winter fuel payment to what tax rate you pay, so that wealthy pensioners would be taken out of the system via that method, I have no idea. And it's worth remembering that we are paying our pensioners, all of us, including our manufacturers, we have the most expensive energy prices in the world. Our electricity prices are 74% higher than America's, 33% higher than our next door neighbours in France. So we're doing this to a group of people, nearly all living on very limited fixed incomes, at a time when bills are sky high anyway, let alone what the implications for gas and oil prices might be as a result of what is going on in the Middle East. And there was one of my constituents I thought sort of rather summed up where we were. 31 missions as tail end Charlie at the back of a Lancaster, and because he has a very small private pension, he's going to lose his winter fuel payment. I don't think the Labour government even begin to understand just how wrong and unfair this seems to so many people. The other worry, of course, is that if you look at what Ed Miliband is doing as Energy Secretary, the 171 successful wind auctions have all happened at strike prices that are double the current market rate for electricity. And that means, I would think, energy prices must rise at least for 10 years. At least for 10 years. So we'll go from being the most expensive energy in the world to even more expensive energy. And that's bad news for the 10 million. But equally, you might just have noticed that we are deindustrialising now at a rate that is almost unthinkable.
Chris McKeon, Press Association. Nigel, a few weeks ago you said that the Speaker's Office and the Parliamentary Security Team had given you advice not to hold in-person constituency surgeries. Speaker's Office says this didn't happen. Parliamentary Security can find no record of such advice being given. Which one of you is lying?
The Speaker's Office is always right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much indeed. Oh, we've got some more, Dan. Final note. I don't know what you're doing later on today, but there's a very, very important new movie that is coming out. It is Labour the Movie, and you can get it tonight on ITV at 6:25 and on BBC One at 6:55.